Joining us. This is the France 24 debates. We're wondering if we're headed towards a breakup of Ukraine, what with armored vehicles moving towards the rebel-held city of Donetsk, the fighting continuing despite a September ceasefire. With us to talk about it, Euromaidan activist Anna Garmesh. We're also in the company of Ellen Wassilina of the Observatory of the Black Gulf and Mediterranean Sea. With us as well, Christine Dugouin, political scientist of, here you say it,
IPSE.
IPSE, there you go. And Anton Kozlov, who teaches at the American Graduate School. Just before the break, we were talking about a weak Ukraine trying to find a multi-party democratic political culture. They're faced with a strongman who's in Beijing at an APEC summit Monday evening. Vladimir Putin, while Barack Obama and Xi Jinping were chatting during seating for a fireworks display. Maybe we can show the pictures there. The recently divorced Putin offering, as you're about to see, his shawl to the Chinese First Lady. There you see, he's all the way on the right of your screen. He offers his shawl to First Lady Peng Liyuan. She takes it for a little bit. And then afterwards, she takes it off again. Anton Kozlov, what do you read into that?
Not much. I think it's just an exchange of politesse, as they say. You know, I wouldn't make any deductions about putting political character out of that. You know?
All right, but we're talking about a weak Ukraine and a strong Russia. Here it is. While all this is happening in Ukraine, there he is signing new gas deals with China and appearing the strongman.
Well, in many ways, he is, and you know, he's been talking about turning towards China and the East for quite a while. In fact, all this discussion about Eurasian integration and Eurasianism has been going for quite a while. I mean, in fact, a few, I would say, at least a decade, if not more. No, he's in a strong position. Now, it is also important, but there are limits to that, because I think the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, particularly the financial part, they've been hurting Russia, and Russia is trying to do whatever it can to stop those sanctions. So I think, of course, he's got a great deal of leverage in this particular situation with Ukraine, but there are limits to that.
But again, 88% popularity, according to that poll.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, for his own legitimacy in Russia, yes. But you have to keep in mind that Russia is not a country on the moon. It's, you know, they're, you know, having a lot of commercial ties, exchanges, and on and on and on. I mean, the United States, the EU, and other parts of the world. So, and in terms of finance in particular, I think it is very important to keep in mind that, in particular, all those sanctions related to long-term credit, in particular, yes.
Investment.
Christine Dugouin, if Anton Kozlov is right and that Russia is feeling the bite of those sanctions, does that mean they're going to pull back when it comes to eastern Ukraine?
Thank you. That's that's the point. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because you said that sanctions start to beat Russian economy. That's true, but we must also see that Vladimir Putin prepared his population to that bite. So people, in a way, agreed, because they know that sanctions are going to happen. And on another hand, European society are touched by sanctions also. So I'm not sure, because he can bet that we are not able to go on sanctions, stronger sanctions, for many points. First, we had to all be agreed.
Oh, really? Because next Monday they're going to be talking about stiffer sanctions,
yes, but
in Brussels.
Yes, I know, but we have to keep in mind that it's not the first time that in Brussels discussion goes on sanctions. And each time, the matter is, for European Union, before taking a decision to increase or to decrease, it's the same. We've got to all be agreed on that. And it's not sure that every country are going to be agreed on that, because their own economy are suffering from that. So maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know. Let's see. But That's not sure. That's really not sure. Just see, there are declarations that have been made in Kazakhstan. I think it was by the Austrian minister, and he said, okay, situation is increasing, a war is increasing in Donbass, but he said, I'm not sure that sanctions are a good option, and different countries said that. So I'm not sure that we are going to be all agreed on that point.
All right, sanctions biting both sides. And again, when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine, when he was pressed about it in Beijing, the Russian president denying any responsibility in the shooting down of MH17 and pointing the finger at Kiev for the inability to get those investigators to the crash site.
The claims that this crash site is controlled by the so-called pro-Russian separatists are absolutely groundless, because it's not them but the other side who is constantly shelling this territory, and that prevents investigators working on the crash site.
Anna Garmesh?
Well, from the last interviews that I've read from members of the International Investigation Commission, especially from the Australian members, who actually said that if they were to some extent able to actually access the crash site, it was thanks to the Ukrainian authorities. So I think those statements that come straight from the source are probably more true.
And we see there, though, a man who looks in control.
Yeah, this is how he would like to look like, obviously. Putin has been trying to show himself as being a strong leader for quite a while. His aim was to show that Russia is back on the international scene, that Russia is a superpower, just like the Soviet Union once was. However, we should ask ourselves the question, are there really grounds to that? Because is Russia economically strong enough? Even militarily, is Russia strong enough to wage war beyond Ukraine? Probably not. I don't think that he has so many reasons to actually be that sure of himself.
Ellen Wassilina, you heard Christine Dugouin there say that Vladimir Putin prepared Russia's population for the possibility of the bite of sanctions, and they're ready to take the hit.
I'll tell you my observations from a conference that went on last week with the Franco-Russian Observatory. And in fact, you see that, in fact, the Russian representative who was there said that obviously the Russians have now turned inward, even though they were not aware, for example, that some of these big oil companies were under sanctions. Only 25%, for example, of population knew that Gazprom, for example, was under sanctions. But he said that Russia is now prepared to look inward, is rallying around the government. They said businesses that may have been more open, pro-Western, adopting Western standards and ideals are now coming back to the state, rallying the state. And then you have a little part of the population, for example, that say that these companies, for example, that are under these sanctions, 47% of these companies felt that they should be helped. And 36% of Russians then criticize the company, say they should do it on their own. So despite the difficulties that Russia is now encountering, despite the popularity that Vladimir Putin has, it is evident that Russia is taking an introspective look, consolidation, businesses coming back to the center. And of course, we can talk about the pivot of the U.S. East. Russia is doing also its pivot, not to mention everything that has to do with energy.
Right. So the question that we mentioned at the outset was, are we sleepwalking into another larger conflict? The London-based European Leadership Network putting out a study that lists close to 40 incidents over the past 8 months where Russia has been involved in, quote, violations of national airspace, emergency scrambles, narrowly avoided mid-air collisions of military jets, close encounters at sea, and simulated attack runs. We could be one mistake away, Anton Kozlov, from a major problem?
Well, I don't think so. Because if you look at the history of Cold War, those kind of incidents, they were quite common. It's something that, I mean, it just, then we got used to not having them, even though back in, let's say, 1999, when the NATO troops went into Kosovo, there was also a major incident. So I don't think we are one accident away, but I think we are certainly heading toward...
So what's the tactic here? Is this Russia's way of, keeping NATO on the back foot?
Well, absolutely. But something that
few jets into
NATO, they do the same thing, and the Russians. I mean, it's maybe surprising to the people who don't know how this alliances and how the military act. But I mean, if you know how they do their business, they do that all the time. So,
all right. Christine Dugoin, when we saw, for instance, there was this search for this mystery submarine near Stockholm, and it never was found, by the way, and Russia denied it had one there.
Yeah, as said Mr. Kosov, it's the same game since many times. They are making provocation on a place and on another ones. So the one who could exactly say what kind of game they are playing is quite smart if ever they are moving in another game.
Ellen Wassilino, are we crying wolf here?
I think we have to be like Mr. Kosov. I'll go back to what he said as well, which is very smart. These are not new games. These are Cold War, old war games. These are, like you rightly said, let's bring the military part into perspective. You have NATO that's come all the way up to Russia's borders. You have an alliance. You have the CIS. You have
the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States.
Thank you. So you have two blocks that are meeting, and where do they meet? They meet right in Ukraine. And it's not only about Ukraine, as Mr. Kosov rightly said. So there's a line, and if you look back historically speaking, where the line between Europe and, say, Asia, and you also talked about Eurasia, Mr. Kosov, which is actually, you see this line of division. I wouldn't say that you should say that Ukraine is going to divide. It's a line of fracture of civilizations, literally, and it's meeting because of our open, globalized society, because of the capacities that we have in, getting information, etc. It's all linked. Trade is now going on everywhere. We're interlocked, and I want to go back just for a minute, if I may, to the sanctions, that we thought, or the people thought, that Russia would be hit more hardly by these sanctions. But in a globalized economy, your shares can be anywhere but transferred digitally. 9% of GDP of London, for example, is held by Russians. So you see, there's the chess pieces are very quick to move, and with this instantaneous communication, everything is so easy. And yes, certainly.
So that is the big difference. Then we're in an interconnected world.
And we say that.
And does that mean that we're not in a new Cold War?
I said the new Cold War is in the old war way, certainly. Before we had the time to think about, before we sent a letter or a cable or sent a horse out. Now we don't have that time of reflection because things just go so quickly. You can send instantaneous things out before, and so there's, I would say, the speed of information spreading. You look at Twitter, you look at other ways that we get our information. It's in your hand, it's in your telephone. You can retweet, you can pick up information so quickly. So the access also to information, the way that we work, it's all going at a much faster pace. But I don't exclude that these old war, Cold War tactics cannot be fit into a new, shall we say, digital model.
All right, and one man who certainly thinks we're at the brink of a new Cold War is the last Soviet president, Mikhail Gorbachev, who spoke at last Sunday's Berlin Wall commemorations.
I'm extremely worried about the bloodbaths in Europe and the Middle East, and the fact that dialogue between the two greatest world powers is breaking down. The world is about to enter into a new Cold War. Some think we're already there.
So, Anna Garmesh, are we really there? And is Ukraine the epicenter of it, as Ellen was suggesting?
It's hard to really talk about a Cold War. Maybe it may be true. However, which is something that's clear, that, as I said before, Russia, or Mr. Putin, for Russia in particular, would actually like to impose, or rather show that Russia is as powerful as Soviet Union used to be during the Cold War. So it's basically showing Russia's strength, whether it's real or not, and it is entering the same sort of schemes, the same sort of framework that old Cold War was taking place in.
And when last February the activists from your movement overthrew Ukraine's president,
Yes.
Did you expect we'd be at this point right now?
Not at all. Really not at all. Back then, mid-February, I wasn't at all expecting Crimea to be gone. I wasn't expecting this war to be taking place. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the next, even a few weeks sometimes.
Well, if you want to ask me the same question, I'll say yes.
You were expecting
Yes,
it.
I was expecting something similar because the problem that, well, you know, I don't know Ukraine that well, but when you listen and look at the right sector rhetorics and what they want and how they
This is
position
the far-right party in Ukraine.
which was very much present during the Maidan, at least in the media. I mean, I haven't had a chance to go there myself, but at least from what I followed online, it was something that was clearly Russia would never accept. And clearly it was an attempt to sort of to elbow them out of their, as they perceive, sphere of influence and sphere of vital interest. So the reaction was, you know, easy to. I mean, once you know the Georgian situation in 2008, I mean, it's so obvious. It's so obvious since the days of the Kosovo War.
Sure. Well, the right sector that you just mentioned actually was extremely minoritary during the Maidan movement as such. Obviously, they do exist. However, they were maybe a little more visible than other people were, just because they're
because they were violent.
They were more violent, clearly, than the others, that's for sure. However, when you look at the elections, the first presidential elections and now the parliamentary elections, the right sector candidates, they got, in the presidential, as far as I remember, something about 1% of the votes and 2% this time. So clearly this does not reflect any
They
sort
were
of...
replaced by the
Ukraine.
Radical Party, which has about 10%. So it's very
The Radical
similar.
Party...
Lishko.
This is a different party. They have a very populist rhetoric, which is different from right sector.
Similar rhetorics. Very similar.
If I can, I was, as I said, an observer for the last election, and I think there is something that we have to say here. In the past, there are many frauds in the Ukrainian election, as you know, but it was the Russian way to make frauds. I mean, everything was planned just before, and there was no violence, not a lot of violence. I mean, when I were in the oblast, I met many people that have been threatened to be killed. I've met a mayor, and just 1 hour before we met, his car have been burned. So
Where was this? Sorry?
in Kirovograd Oblast. It's in the south of Kiev, around few...
So people
2 hours.
intimidated on their way to the
Yeah,
ballot
there
box.
was a lot of tension, a lot of violence, and people were...
By who?
That's the matter, because some of them thought that it was the responsibility of Svoboda parties, that is another
Far-right party.
far-right parties. And yes, that's true. They didn't come into the radar, but the way they act, the way they react is going, it's the first time. And for me, it's a bad sign if ever it is going to become an habit. Because in the past, there are no this kind of violence in the elections. It was the first time. And every people that we were talking about, I mean, pro-Kiev and even pro-Russian said, whoa, that's new.
All right. And at the same time, we saw this Tuesday in the Financial Times, Gideon Rachman's column, where he said that the tension with Russia is the biggest problem for the West, bigger than ISIS. Why? Because you're dealing with a wounded bear in this particular case, and it's so volatile and unpredictable.
Certainly, as we said earlier, but I just want to go back to your point, if I may. I think you can see not only in Ukraine, but a rise in general in nationalism, nationalist parties, even as we see in other countries, and not only in Ukraine, you know, even in France, etc. But certainly the sanctions, the financial situation, the dependency, which we didn't even get a chance to talk about, energy dependency and interdependency. You know that Europe gets 25% overall of its energy from Russia. Baltic states 100%, Bulgaria 100%, where I was just speaking about energy efficiency. So wounded bear, I would not say so. Russia is an actor. It's a European country. I think we have to learn how to work with Russia. If we're going to slap it with sanctions, if we're going to isolate Russia, that could be even worse. What was mentioned in this conference, again, if I may, those countries that were under sanctions, Did they bear better or did they bear worse? And you're looking at Israel, South Africa, Iran. Are we ready to deal with those type of solutions?
All right, and that brings up, because we are France 24, the question that everybody's always asking, should France be delivering those Mistral-class warships to Russia or not? The ones that...
My opinion, I think France should, because it's not going to change anything in the equation, really. It's going well, and it's going to be good for future French-Russian business.
But politically, can you be seen to be delivering these amphibious warships that could help the Russians take the city of Mariupol, for instance?
Well, I think if the Russians want to take the city of Mariupol, they can do it without Mistrals, you know. It's not going to really change much.
Anna Garmesh?
Well, obviously, I don't think that France should sell those ships. It's not just because of the capacity that those ships, that are fairly well made, that will be giving to Russia immediately. This is one point, obviously, but there is another point, which is technology transfer, because two ships may not change everything. However, the technology transfer, the possibility that Russia may build other ships like this, is a major point. Basically, selling Mistral ships is arming a country which is waging war against its neighbor, a European neighbor, maybe not within the European Union, but a country which is just on the border with the European Union, a potential, or not just a potential, but technically an ally. So I don't think this can be a good thing. This creates clear distortions within European Union more generally, because, for instance, Poland right now is looking in a very angry way at France. Why are you basically creating such divisions within Europe, whereas we're supposed to stick together?
Consequences if France doesn't deliver it, consequences if they do. I want to thank you, Anna Garmesh. I want to thank Christine Dugouin, Ellen Wassilina, Anton Kozlov. Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next.
Evening, Francois.
Let's say hello to James Creedon. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. One of the topics we've been looking at this evening is how the Ukraine conflict has been covered in the media. Just a quick word on that. L'Express.fr, the French news weekly, is contrasting the level of coverage in Ukrainian and Russian media, I suppose not surprising given that they're the principal concerned parties, with the amount of coverage on Western television screens. The amount of coverage, according to their analysis of things, has significantly diminished over the last number of months. I suppose the intensity of the combat has, since the beginning at least, diminished, even if we've had 300 deaths in the last few weeks. But looking at the fact that jihadi violence in Syria and Iraq seems to be generating more interest in European media, according to L'Express's reading of things, Francois. They say that it could be to do with the fact that you have several combatants or fighters of European extraction. It's a story that's generating more curiosity on social media and in the mainstream media, whereas the Eastern Front of this combat in the east of Ukraine somehow seems further away, even though it's on the same continent.
Even though geographically it is closer.
Exactly. So that's one story we'll be looking at. Another one is Vladimir Putin yesterday evening at APEC. A gesture that is being interpreted...
yes, we mentioned it earlier there.
Indeed, interpreted as chivalrous or perhaps flirtatious. It seems like not many people can't really figure it out. 17 questions about this bizarre video of Vladimir Putin maybe flirting with China's First Lady. In any case, foreign policy seem to have made their mind up. He was hitting on her, and censors in China, Francois, went wild, according to the American reading of things. But you can see here various vines, etc., showing that moment where he, apparently in quite a cold environment, he put a shawl around the Chinese First Lady's shoulders while Xi Jinping was looking the other way. So I suppose you could interpret it as a slightly cheeky move.
Putin's available now.
This is exactly it. And it's Singles Day in China. The 11th of November is actually Singles Day. So everybody, of course, is jumping to these conclusions. You know, it's not the first time he's done this. Shawl covering skills, as pointed out by the BBC's website, this at a G20 summit recently. And it did remind me
David Cameron looked a little miffed in that.
Indeed. It did remind me of the, uncomfortable gestures of that the chivalry of Jacques Chirac provoked as well. I think Laura Bush was a little bit, she didn't really know what to make of that. And Merkel again.
I think she was delighted.
I think she probably was. And Merkel here, whether it be Scholz or Besman, she's clearly the object of heads of state.
Likes a Besman.
Indeed, I think so. I think it's generally appreciated, but except by perhaps Chinese state media.
Okay. James Green, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.